What's up, YouTubers? So for today's video, we are going to be diving into abrasive grits and how to sand your welding coupons and your welding table to clean everything up. And I'm going to give a ton of ideas on that. And we're going to test some stuff that I've never used before to see maybe it works better than what I normally do. I doubt it, but we'll find out. So let's get into it. So first things first, let me clean all this garbage out of here so we can have a clean working environment somewhat. Now, I have a bunch of different grits, different style of discs, all that are used on an angle grinder, and it makes sense to just go through them right away to explain what they're used for and the differences. This is something that you're probably most commonly using, very familiar with, and that's just the standard abrasive flap disc. Now this is a 4.5 inch 40 grit. These come in 40, 60, 80, 120, and probably other grits as well. These are great because as they wear, it exposes more grit and essentially a new cutting edge. So these perform really well and they give a really good surface finish. The downside to them, well, for one, when they wear like this, like if you look at this, hopefully I can get it to focus. You see how that grit is like offset in, and then it's just the bare like fabric or whatever that the grit's on. When these things wear, you have to put more pressure on them to get them to cut. So what you're gonna find is when you get about halfway through this, or like where this is at, and this isn't halfway, it takes a lot of pressure to get this to cut. These are what I call the hard rock wheel. It's basically a waffle style. These are basically nothing but grit. I mean, it's a whole sandwich fabric wheel. These pretty much cut all the time. It's not like the flap discs where once the material wears away that you have to use more pressure. These cut very consistently start to finish. The downside to this style of a wheel is a surface finish on this is far from ideal. Like this even, and this is like, they don't even rate this in a grit, but it's probably like a 20 grit, maybe a 40 grit. But the surface finish off of this is gonna look terrible in comparison to a flap disc. And that may be an issue. And you'll see that when we actually test this and I show you the difference in the surface finish. But this, if you want to grind mill scale, this is the disc to use. Flap discs will tend to load up with mill scale. This, for the most part, won't. They do make, and I don't happen to have one, a disc that's like this with a waffle pattern where it has high and low ridges. That I've heard will chew through mill scale all day, all night, and not clog up. This eventually will clog up, but you cut it on an edge of like some steel or something like this, and it will burn all that off and it'll work again. So if you got a lot of mill scale to clean, this would be my go-to to begin with. And then if you need a better finish, use a flap disc to finish it. Now this is a little bit of an oddball. So at first glance, this looks like a cutting disc, but this is actually capable of grinding. It's thicker than a standard cutoff wheel and it's designed to do that. Now, I don't generally use these for grinding mill scale and for doing that. I prefer, like I said, these, they just wear longer, and this is almost the same price as this. And it's like, well, which one do you think will last longer? But this is a reasonable option for cleaning mill scale off, and the reason is, as this edge wears and gets loaded up with mill scale, it's just going to wear off, always exposing a new grinding edge. So on mill scale, I guarantee you this will be more effective, faster than even probably this. The downside is these don't last long and are expensive for what you get. So that's something to consider, but this I think is going to be pretty effective. Now, this guy, I've never used one of these. It's called a just steel solid blah blah blah. This is very thin and essentially it has a surface coating that this stuff feels almost like tungsten. I mean, stupidly hard. I mean, you can hear it. Very thin. I'm going to attempt to use this today for mill scale removal. I have a feeling This is like 20 grit. It probably will work fast. It'll leave a terrible surface finish, and it probably won't load up on mill scale. But I gotta be honest, I don't think that this is gonna last all that long. I mean, the coating is, if you can even see that, is literally like non-existent in thickness. So I don't have high hopes for this, but I've never used one and I happen to see them at the local store, so we'll try that. Another one that you guys probably aren't too familiar with is what I call just a paper disc. Now, I looked around my new shop and I couldn't find the backing for it, but essentially it's a plastic piece that looks like this. This goes on it, and then you thread a nut that holds this on. I find that these are actually very useful because, well, for one, when you wear it out, you just toss the paper disc away, get another one, and that's cheaper than, you know, a whole disc. Granted, they don't last as long as like this hard rock, but you can get grits in this that you can't normally get in flap discs. Like 120 is a common disc you can get. It's harder to find those in flap discs, especially locally. Online you can get anything, but you can get even 200 grit with this. So I find that this for surface finishing is probably your best option depending on what you're doing. This or the flap disc. And it's just that you can tailor this to what you're actually doing. You know, none of these are really a perfect for every situation type deal. You know, so you kind of got to play around with what your end results that you're aiming for are and how fast you want to get there, and that will determine what to use. And I'll tell you what, in my experience, anything that works fast doesn't last. I mean, that's just the nature of the beast with grinding. So with that said, let's start out by cleaning some of those coupons over there, and we'll get them all shiny, bright and shiny, and see how long it takes. So to start things off, we're going to go with the flap disc here. Now, I don't have a brand new 40 grit. I got 60s and 80s, so I'm going to use a used wheel on this. Not ideal, but it is what it is. Due to the way that that works as it wears, it kind of still stays sharp. I think we'll be all right. And again, this isn't a scientific test. It's just to give you guys an overview. I'm going to use my cordless grinder, and no, I don't have a guard on it. And I've said that before on this particular tool. I generally don't use the guard. On any other grinder I have, I do, and the reason is this has far less power and overall is far less dangerous than the plug-in variety. So it is what it is, deal with it. So let's just clean this up. Now I want to show you something. I kind of did that on purpose. Focus, you bastard. Where I only barely touched it. You see how it looks shiny there? And it's like, oh man, I cleaned through the mill scale because this is dull, this is shiny. But the truth is, this is clean through. This is not. That's just polished mill scale. I've seen it time and time again where people are like, yeah, I prepped my material properly, and they're like, look how clean it is. And it's like, yeah, that's polished mill scale. So unpolished mill scale, polished mill scale, bright and shiny metal. When you clean your coupons and anything you're welding, bright and shiny is what you want, not polished mill scale. All right, let's finish this one up. So if you look here, this is clean, bright and shiny. That's polished, that's untouched. This is what you want. Now you can see a 40 grit leaves a pretty consistent, smooth finish. I mean, there's nothing really that I can feel. There's scratch marks, but it's not like a rough finish by any means. Very acceptable finish. Now, there you go. Get the reflection out of it so you can see it better. Now the flap disc, I could tell, was already loading up with mill scale when I was grinding this, and you can tell because you can put more and more force and it doesn't seem to cut. Like, you don't feel it torquing at all because it's not cutting. We'll take a look at that disc. Normally you'll see, and this isn't too bad, you'll start seeing black debris on the very edge, and that's the mill scale clogging it up. This doesn't look too bad, but again, this isn't the best tool to be using for grinding mill scale off. So let's go use the hard rock. So I got the hard rock on here, got a new plate so that we can be, you know, fair here. So let's grind this sucker. So let's take a look at that. Now, being that it was a new hard rock wheel, it's got a hard edge on it, and it tends to skip. Once that edge gets rolled over, then it you know, grinds a lot smoother. So this took a little longer than what it should have. And again, until that wheel gets broken in after a couple minutes of use, it's going to do that. Now the surface finish, you can see, it leaves a lot to be desired. Now it didn't help that it was skipping so much because of that hard edge, but you get the picture. And you can't see it too well, but when I touch this, it feels like it has fur on it. And that's from how rough of a surface finish there is. It's not an end of the world bad idea to grind mill scale off with a hard rock and then touch it up with a 40, 60, 80 flap disc real fast. That'll give a better surface finish. But yeah, you could say that it's pretty rough. And if you have to polish this after the fact, that is not the disc to be using, because your scratches are going to run so deep that you're going to have to polish a third of the material off before you even get to where it polishes. The speed on it for being a brand new wheel was slower than it would normally, and this is going to be way faster than a flap disc. I can tell you that right now. Now you will see some of this brown is mill scale, some of it's just because the edge wore off a little bit. These do tend to load up as well with mill scale. It's just the difference is it's very easy to get it off. You just grind it on the edge of something like my table there, and it'll clean off. And you can see that 90-degree edge. Once that rounds over, it grinds a lot smoother. It doesn't skip as bad. So there you have it for that. Let's move on. So now I got the duo disc that's real thin, and we're gonna use that to grind this mill scale off. So you can see very quick grinds through that really decent. I didn't get that there, but don't pay attention to that. The surface finish, just feeling it, is better than a hard rock. There's no doubt this is closer to like a flap disc, not quite. So better surface finish, equally as fast, I would say, if not faster than the hard rock. I noticed that wheels like that tend not to jump around as much. The hard rocks tend to bounce a lot worse, so these tend to be smoother. And it goes without saying, and I'm going to put it out there, using a cutoff wheel to do the same thing as this duo disc, is it the smartest thing? No. Have I done it? Yes. It does, you know, a cutoff disc does grind off mill scale much like this. The problem is those cutoff wheels are not designed to have sideways loading. They're designed to cut. And because of that, when you put it, and I'll grab one, when you take this disc and you put a sideways loading and push it, you can end up blowing these wheels up. The way that they're constructed, they're not designed for a side loading. Now, like I said, have I done it? Yes. On the Milwaukee grinder that doesn't have that much power, it's less likely to blow up. If you were to do that with a corded grinder that has any amount of RPM, you're asking to get shrapnel. There's no doubt about it. So I wouldn't recommend that. Use a disc designed for that. And I'll show you the difference. This is constructed in a manner that is safe to use for a sideways loading. It's also a little bit thicker than this, but the way that they lay the waffle pattern in there and everything apparently makes it more stable for doing that. So if you're gonna do, you know, like I did there and use one of these, screw that. Use a properly designed disc. And this is a viable option. It works pretty good. Again, the issue with this is the cost of it. This disc is not cheap, and you're going to get far more use out of a hard rock for damn near the same amount. All right, let's go to the last one. So now we're going to use this grind solid whatever disc. Unsure on the grit on this, but you can see very, very rough. And I don't have high expectations on this. I think it's going to grind really good and it's going to remove that material fast, but I bet the surface finish is going to be terrible. That was unbelievably fast. As you can see, there's no mill scale. Like, essentially, as soon as I touched it, the mill scale was gone. Like, it was like sanding wood with 20 grit. The surface finish is, I would say, on par with as rough as a hard rock. Maybe a little bit better in spots, a little bit worse, but it feels like it has peach fuzz on it from the, you know, rough finish. It's not as bad as I would have thought, to be honest with you. So that worked pretty good. I might have to use that type of disc more, but like I said earlier, I think the issue is going to be the longevity of it. I don't remember what I paid for that, probably $6-7. Like, if it only lasts, you know, a quarter of the time as a hard rock, you know, well, is it worth it? Well, for time-wise it is, but, you know, that's going to get expensive fast. Let's take a look at the actual disc. You can see mill scale, that's that light gray crap that's stuck to there. But this thing's so aggressive, so abrasive that I don't hardly think this is going to be, you know, if it loads up, it's still going to cut type deal. The edges wore a little bit on this. Again, I don't think the longevity of this product is going to be that good. But it does work. I mean, there's no question about that. I mean, I can tell you from personal experience here, this is way faster than any of the other ones. I mean, I barely even tried to do that and it cut through it. All right, well, let's prep this welding table here with these and see what we get for finish and all of that. Well, you can see all the rings from setting stuff that sweats when you set that down and then water sits there. It's gonna rust. Now, I did use a anti-spatter on this, but clearly it's anti-spatter and not anti-rust. So there's probably a better product out there for anti-spatter that would prevent rust. I just didn't use it. So you can see this is kind of in a little bit rusty shape, especially over here where I didn't buff it, but we're gonna clean this all up and look at the different results of the product. So now keep in mind, this is like over an inch thick, very heavy plate table, and I can all day cut and grind this and it's not going to make a difference. If you have a thinner table, you want to be pretty careful doing this, and that's why you want to be focusing more on the preventing of rust and less on the, you know, let's grind it out type. So we'll start with the 40 grit flap disc and let's grind this smooth. So you can see the 40 grit gives a pretty nice surface finish. I don't feel any peach fuzz on this. It cleaned up the rust to bright shiny, no issue there. So it works really good for that. Now, it's a little bit slow, and it left kind of, I mean, I would call it a finish that's going to take a lot more work to polish. It's not the worst, but it's not the best. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to swap off this 40 grit and go all the way up to an 80 grit just to show you the difference in surface finish. Now, this is a brand new 80 grit, so it may actually give somewhat of a rough finish because it's not broken in. So you could probably hear how it kind of was skipping around a little bit, and let me zoom in on this. And it simply wasn't broken in. This is, I would say, even smoother obviously than the 40 grit, and the scratches are much, much smaller. Again, this is not a precision grinding instrument. You know, it has, it's far from that, you know, it's not a polisher, but the surface finish on this is, I would say, very good. And for like cleaning stuff to weld it, this is beyond what you would need. The 40 grit's fine. So let's go on and try the hard rock. So here's a hard rock. I'm going to grind right next to it, and let's see what this can do. Well, part of it is I'm an idiot and I was kind of doing things a lot wrong to show you. But part of it is hard rocks take a long time to grind something flat like this. Like, they're really designed for material removal fast and not really for surface grinding on something like this. Now, the problem partially is that wheel's not broken in, so it has such a small contact area that it just wants to grind on a small edge. But when you're doing this, you can't lay it flat, and I did that to kind of show you. You hopefully saw that it just gouges in and leaves really tough marks to remove, so you don't want to lay it flat. You want to have it at an angle. But when you do that, it's only cutting, you know, a ½ inch wide versus your flap disc is cutting way wider. It's, you know, more material. So using a hard rock to grind a big surface like this is not ideal. It cuts good. I mean, just compare the two surface finishes. Which would you rather have? Obviously this one. It's a much cleaner looking surface. That's very rough, which is to be expected. And I didn't even really get all of the places in here. I mean, it would take a little bit. And that's one benefit to the flap disc, is because it's flexible, you can get it to like grind into hollows better than you can a hard rock that has zero flex. So let's move on to the next one. So here I have the dual disc that's kind of similar to a cutoff wheel, and let's buff this up. Well, you can see, I would say it almost cleaned up better than the hard rock. It doesn't like scoop as much material out. It's smoother. The surface finish is completely different. This still does have peach fuzz on it, so it's not the cleanest, but I would say that I like the way that looks far better than the hard rock. It's a little bit easier to get clean straight lines. I kind of was screwing around with it, testing it to see, but since that disc, you don't want to put so much force that you flex it, and you can't really lower it very close flat to get it like a flatter approach to get a wider cut angle or amount of cut. Because, well, if you look here, this right here hits, you know, so you can't, like, it's not even touching, so you're limited on angle with that. So overall, I would say it works good, but I rather have the flap disc to clean this table off, since this being a ½ inch wide cut is just going to take far, far too long to do this table. So let's move on to the last one. So I got that oddball ceramic carbide, or what, who knows what it is, and let's give this a shot. So as in the previous test, it cut much faster, I would say, than the others. It's a slightly wider cut, so it's closer to maybe an inch or 3/4 versus like a 1/2 inch with that dual disc and like a 1/4 inch with a Hard Rock. Now, it doesn't seem to be loading up with much. It is wearing on the edge though, you can see that. I'm not really sure how long this thing's gonna last, but so far I gotta say I like it for what it is. The surface finish has quite a bit more peach fuzz to it than the dual disc does. This is like the peach fuzz of a Hard Rock, so a pretty rough surface finish. But the good news is that if you hit this with a 80 or 60 grit flapper wheel, it would buff that all off in an instant and be pretty clean. So I don't see that as too much of a negative. But yeah, the surface finish on that dual disc is definitely better. There's no question about it. So based on this small scale testing, I would say, as suspected, all of these have different use, different performance, different feel to them, different results. I mean, let's face it. For cleaning a table like this, I would definitely prefer the flap disc. It simply cuts wider, it gives a better surface finish, and it's gonna outlast like this or this. I mean, those would probably be smoked after doing this table once or twice. This flap disc I could probably do 6-7 times on the same disc and it would still, you know, last. Another thing worth mentioning here, if you look at this over here, see all that grinding dust? When you use a Hard Rock disc, the main thing I don't like about them is a massive amount of grinding dust they produce. Like, not only is it all over everything, and it tends to be magnetic, so it sticks to stuff and probably shorts your welder out or gets in your beard and pisses your old lady off, but I don't like the grinding dust. So Hard Rocks, you know, I use them occasionally, but they're not my favorite from that respect. This produced far less dust. You probably didn't see it, but it did, but it still produced some. This guy over here didn't seem to produce much of any dust beyond the metal dust. Like, being so thin and so hard, it just chews away at the material rather than the material chewing away at this. So to keep your shop clean, you're far better off with this or a flap disc. Flap discs tend not to produce, you know, much dust anywhere near what this guy is. Now, the surface finish on these, clearly the winner is a flap disc. Like, it doesn't matter what Hard Rock you get, the flap disc is gonna have a better surface finish. Like, if aesthetics matter, or if you plan on polishing it after you grind it, flap disc is the way to go. There's no question about it. The surface finish, I would say, was the roughest on the Hard Rock, which again, as it breaks in and rounds that edge over, it will produce a better finish. But for aesthetic purposes, Hard Rock is not what you want to go to. And then these two produce very much the same surface finish, I would say. This was a little bit smoother, but the appearance of it is very similar. And this is simply faster and a little bit wider as well, which is partially why it's faster. So I gotta say, so far I'm pretty impressed with this. I'll have to update you guys on how long it lasts, because I'll use it to clean mill scale off on coupons in the future. But I think that's gonna be possibly my new go-to for this because of how fast it is. You know, it takes a lot of time to shoot and prep these videos and all of that. So, you know, 2 minutes worth of savings is 2 minutes. Like, it goes a long way. I can produce more videos because it sounds ridiculous. Why would 2 minutes matter? But when you got to do, you know, 2 minutes 20 times, you know, a day to shoot some videos, it matters. So I'll have to, you know, really put this through the paces and let you guys know what I think of it. I actually bought this from Menards. They're a fairly well-known brand. They're called Ferd. I believe that's how you pronounce them. They're not sponsoring this video or anything. I'm not brand loyal to any grinding disc. I mean, I buy these from Menards, which is why they're all Ferd, because that's what Menards sells. I'm a big fan of Diablo's products. They tend to be more expensive. They seem to work. But honestly, I would say Ferd, I like them, and then Diablo. And then, of course, like, I got Benchmark abrasives, and they seem to be okay. They're about average, I would say. Not great, not pour, and they're pretty affordable, so I bought that in a pack. In the future, I'm going to do a shootout where I test a bunch of flap discs to get an idea, because honestly, people have done it, but not with enough brands to really get a good idea, because I think there's going to be some standouts that are worth it and some that aren't worth the money. So I'm going to dive into that pretty soon, because I'm curious and I'm sure you guys are. So with that said, what I'm going to do now is clean this table off, and I'm going to use this flap disc and polish this sucker up as good as I can get it. So let's get into it. There's far less dust here. I mean, you can see there's still, like, that's gray, that's steel dust, compared to that hard rock was just all black dust. Not good for your lungs or for your electronic devices. So let's just go to a quick conclusion. So what did we learn today? Well, I learned that some discs work better for things than others, and I kind of knew that. And I got to say that one furred disc seems to cut mill scale like an animal, so I'm definitely going to try that out for a while and see, because it should save me some time. But hopefully you learned that it really depends on what you're looking to do as to what the correct disc is. So with that said, thanks for sticking around. Till next time.